Oh, what Steve is. Oh, boy. Got there.
Okay. We are recording again. We'll ditch those first couple of minutes of introduction. Anyways, moving on. Again, it's a relevant time for this training, and we're going to go over some of the information that we need to know about anhydrous ammonia. I'm going to provide knowledge and understanding of the physical and chemical properties, provide knowledge and understanding of the health effects, talk about some of the first aid considerations, and then some risk-based response decisions and recommendations, okay? Because again, what level of hazardous materials are we as a department technically?
Operations.
We would be, awareness to operations. So there's not a lot of mitigation we're going to do in most of these instances. What is our role? What are we going to try to do?
Assist.
We're going to assist.
Control.
We're going to try to control. We're going to try to isolate an area. We're going to contact help. And we could make this whole 1 hour presentation real short, quite honestly, by going, if you have any type of chemical leak, have dispatch call Battalion 9, have Battalion 9 call you and see what they want to do. Because that's how we're going to handle hazardous materials for the most part. But again, as we'll talk about it when we get into it a little deeper, not every anhydrous ammonia leak is a big emergency crisis that we cannot handle. So there's a few things that we can do if we need to. So we're going to talk about the use of the properties, health effects, and first aid and response decisions, considerations. So again, on the periodic table, anybody who's real nerdy, it's going to be an NH3. That's what we're looking for as far as if I have to research anhydrous ammonia, Google it, look it up in a book. I'm a hazardous. How many hazmat technicians do we have? I know there's a few. I mean, I took it over 15 years ago, and all I remember from the class is that I need to have really good reference material. Okay. So, if it's not something you do on a very regular basis, hazardous materials is not something that really comes to you that you're going to be proficient at. If you work in a factory setting, maybe where you deal with chemicals a lot, if you're on a regional team, specialized unit sort of thing, but around here, really not our thing.
Do you have any metallurgical factories around here over on the industrial side?
Not that I'm aware of. And that's one thing I was going to ask Kevin when we get into it. They talk about water treatment is another location where you'll find anhydrous ammonia. I don't know if that's our process here or not. Is Kevin in there yet? Is he back?
Yeah.
No, we don't have anhydrous ammonia.
Okay, so again, I think, other than agricultural use, we're not going to find it here very often. Now, I don't know, like Franklin has a large interstate warehouse over on the east side. It's a refrigerated structure. Maybe they have it. I don't know what other areas have, but yeah, it's not something in our district you're going to find in a industrial manufacturing role. We're just going to see it agriculturally. So, some of the different names, right, or classifications. It's anhydrous ammonia, the NH3, liquefied compressed gas. And then what does anhydrous mean? I mean, it's on the screen there, but right, without water. Okay, and that's very important for a number of reasons. We'll get into that. Aqua ammonia, ammonia and water, NH4OH is the title for that. It is and can be a corrosive liquid. Ammonium hydroxide, and then ammonia solution. So we usually see that from 10 to 35% concentration by weight. We pretty much just see it straight. Like I said, it's going to be a compressed tank of liquid anhydrous ammonia. And then when we generally have to deal with it, it's going to be in what state?
Yes.
Usually it's going to be a gaseous state and a release for any number of reasons. Okay. Some of the uses, fertilizers, again, that's where we're going to see it. And I know I'm glad that Steve's here today because I've told this story for 2 days now, but we once sat on the tailgate of a grass rig in an open field that was being plowed, waiting on a hazmat team and a full response while this anhydrous ammonia was pouring into the field like it was a world-ending event. Is anhydrous ammonia pouring into a working field a real crisis?
No.
No, right. Why? Because what was the intentional use of that anhydrous ammonia? They were going to put it in the field. But again, at the time, the person in charge of the incident, after he got done throwing our pass alarms across the field and into the woods because they kept going off, insisted that we turn it into a full-blown hazmat response while the farmer was there getting pretty agitated about, listen, I'm going to put it in the ground anyway. You're wasting my money. So it's something to keep in mind. We do need to be familiar with the processes and the uses. So again, this liquid form pouring into the street in a storm drain, problematic. Being dumped into the ground on a farm field, not so much, right? So just be aware of the situation. Power plants, again, I don't believe we have that here. Refrigeration, not as well. Water treatment, we finally got that answer. Diazo machines, I don't know how much it is. But again, probably the secondary concern that we will have that has very much died down over the last few years is the illicit use. Now, I don't know if they've gotten better at stealing it to where they don't leak anymore. I don't know if the security of the facilities has gotten better, or I don't know if the process of manufacturing methamphetamines has become more refined. But for whatever reason, we don't see a lot of the illicit use anymore. I mean, upwards to 10 years ago, rolling meth labs in a vehicle in the interstate, in a hotel room, garages, things like that. You are finding this pretty frequently. You get called for, police would pull a car over on 65 late at night and smell ammonia, have a trunk full of LP tanks making, methamphetamines while they were rolling around. So, those wannabe Heisenbergs were causing us a lot of trouble for a few years. Not only that, they would start to try to steal it from a nurse tank or a facility, a fixed facility, and they get a face full and run, leaving it exhausting or leaking from there. And that's where we would get some calls there for a while. But I haven't heard, I don't know, what are you on the police side, Mike? You guys doing much of that? Yeah. So again, I think that's kind of died down for any number of reasons. I'm not sure. It's good. So the properties, it is a colorless liquid, but pungent odor. Geoffrey was asking, does it stink or does it smell like ammonia? Absolutely. There's probably not going to be an ammonia leak and you not recognize it. It is one of those very, very strong pungent odors. And you do not have to, obviously, we will see a cloud as it's being released, but you do not have to see it to inhale it, right? It is a colorless gas once it starts to dissipate a little bit, but that odor is very strong, even in a very highly diluted state. Boiling point's a -28, so what does that tell us really? I mean, I don't need to know this scientifically, but what does that tell me?
It's not cold enough.
Right, it reacts very much to low heat, right? Low heat's gonna have a big impact on its state, on its actions and what it does. Liquid density, again, 5.15 pounds, and we talked about this while you guys were gone, but the vapor density is 0.6. Why is that important? Well, normally, what will that tell me about a chemical? If it's 0.6, what's it likely going to do if it's in the vapor state?
Rise.
Right, it's going to be lighter than air, so it's going to rise. What's different about anhydrous ammonia that makes it unpredictable to where I can't really count on that scientific point being an indicator of its actions? Stepping back to the term anhydrous, what is relevant about this chemical that makes it almost work against its own chemical properties when it's released?
It's looking for moisture.
Yeah, it is looking for water.
It's
Right, it is going to go to the nearest source of moisture. So that may be, this could travel uphill, it can travel downhill, it can travel laterally. It is absolutely, for one, it's going to be affected by humidity, wind, barometric pressure, all those things. But it is also going to go very quickly towards any that's awesome, source of moisture. And if there isn't one nearby, what do we become? We become that source of moisture, okay? Most importantly, our lungs, right? So that's why we'll talk about a little bit of what we can and can't do. But yeah, it's usually, the vapor is going to be different at atmospheric conditions, and then the liquid is under pressure when it's in the tanks, okay? Here's just some photos of some different training evolutions. Clearly, this is a commercial or industrial setting. I have never done any real intense training on this. Most of my hazardous materials hands-on skills when I did it, even though it was one of the state hazmat guys who came down and taught it, most of it was tabletop. We did a liquid leak. So our skills were pretty limited. And again, if you're not on a regularly responding hazmat team and training regularly, most of this we don't really touch on very much. This is probably the second most concerning hazardous material that we'll deal with, and its occurrence is very low. What's the one that we do more than anything? Any hazardous material leak?
Carbon monoxide.
Yeah, I mean, I won't say you're wrong. Carbon monoxide is a little different, but.
Natural gas.
All right, I was looking for fuel leaks. Sorry, like diesel, gasoline. So that's the one that we're going to deal with most of all. And what's unique, I mean, what's not unique about those? They're easy to manage, right? You can see it. They're predictable. They're going to flow with the pattern of the road. You can throw Pete-Zorb down, whatever the case is. This is much different, okay? So just keep that in mind. Those are really the two hazardous materials called. You're not wrong. CO is an issue, natural gas leaks, but the ones that we will actually mitigate will be dealing with this or handling a liquid fuel spill. All right. And again,
Well, keeping in mind, we got 69 coming through, so you don't know what they're going to be taught.
yeah, once the interstate comes in, who knows what you might find out there. So, here on this photo, again, they're just showing, and we'll talk about it very briefly later. One thing that we can do is throw a tarp over the leak. You got to have a tarp big enough. Now, the only thing I will add is as you look at these, you got the guys back here on the hose line. Okay, they're protective. What are they wearing?
Yes.
They're wearing SCBA and structural firefighting gear. On all of these photos, as we move through, anybody who is up close dealing with a vapor leak utilizing this tent procedure, what do we see them in? They're in a level B, level A's, depending on some of the photos, you'll get to a level A suit. So just keep that in mind. The exposure to this is one of the main concerns outside of the respiratory issue, okay? So we want to make sure that we are wearing the proper gear if we're going to actually do it. If we have to go any deeper than an operations level, then we're going to actually have someone else do that for us. Okay. Again, here's some photos. I don't know. There's a lot of pictures with no explanations throughout this program, so I just make it up. So anyway, again, some of the properties, all right, it has a very much a pressure and temperature relationship. So the hotter it will start to adjust, pressure it will adjust. And again, with that low boiling point, if we have a tank that's dropped off in a field with the intention of using the next day, what happens to it as it sets in the sun?
Expands.
Right, it heats up, that low boiling point causes it to expand, it'll condensate, and eventually you might have pop-off valves. And those are the ones where I think Steve mentioned it earlier, you may get called for the smell of ammonia, say down in Union Township. By the time you get dispatched and you get in the truck and drive down, there's nothing found. Why is that? What's happened in that travel time?
It's already closed.
Right, it's reset. It's regulated its own pressure, relief valve resets, and there's no problem. So that's something where you may have a lot of unfoundeds with those types of calls. If it's not a ruptured tank or something like that, you may not even have to deal with it once you've called, okay? It does have a high coefficient of expansion and a high volumetric expansion ratio, and it's independent of the volume. It even doesn't really matter how much is in a tank volume-wise, it's the pressure that it creates because of all of these factors that will, you might have a tank that has 5% of its content, and it might leak off just as easily as something with 85% based on the outside conditions. So just because it's not a full tank, really, I mean, it does somewhat make it more at risk, but not enough with the way this stuff is so vulnerable. So again, that volumetric expansion ratio is 850 to 1. So you can kind of visualize that, right? If I have, 1 pound per square inch or whatever, once that leaves the tank, 1 gallon of this turns into 850 gallons. It expands in the atmosphere. So keep that in mind. If I've got a tank that holds these nurse tanks, anybody know how much a nurse tank holds roughly? Okay, I only do because I read
7,000 or 8,000 pounds.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, if I was looking for gallonage.
I don't know. We have to do math. Like
That's
almost
fine.
1,000. Yeah,
It's
1,000.
like 1,000 to 1,400 gallons, right? So again, multiply that times 850, you've got a large cloud potential. So just something to keep in mind. And now that's the nurse tanks. We normally don't find only one nurse tank. We also have in our district and then directly adjacent to our district, 2 facilities with large volumes. We have the co-op down on 300 in Trafalgar and Umbarger's facility. They have high volumes of this on site where they fill the nurse tankers and send them out. So
Hey, Chief, did you get my text message?
just, no, I mean, probably.
Well, it's, so all these farm tanks, they use a material or substance called N-Serve. I sent you, I just a picture of what it is in the compound. It basically, it stabilizes the nitrogen, the anhydrous ammonia, so that it does not leach through the ground. It's all of it is used basically off of ground temperature. So when they put the liquid in the ground, the N-Serve, in theory, keeps it from leaching into the ground until the ground gets warm enough, and then that's when the nitrogen is actually used. So I mean, it's not just pure anhydrous. I mean, there is another substance, and that picture I sent you is what that substance is.
Okay.
Does that change the properties or what it would do?
I don't think.
No,
if
it
it's
don't change
leaking, it's a
anything we do.
vapor,
It's
no,
just
right?
information.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll forward that out too. And like I said, I've mentioned this, so I've had, over the last few days, there was Chief Morris was in the room. We've had Chief Pruitt in the room. We've got Jeremy. We've got guys who do have an agricultural background, but they may or may not be working that day. Might be on another call. So we need to have at least a basic knowledge of this kind of stuff. And the one thing that we'll touch on, I don't mind jumping around a little bit, but if those guys aren't available, right, who's the maybe not even the next best thing, probably better than those guys, but who's the best source of information on this if we have a response? Right, the farmers, the driver, whoever is around there. We have a pretty quick direct line to the embargers. If we have a situation, we can get a hold of one of those guys. Down in Trafalgar, you got Cook and those guys who work at the co-op. There are resources that sort of cross roles that you can get a hold of to help you with this. But yeah, if they are not incapacitated, injured, or affected, then get with the people. This is no different than the grain bin incidents we talk about. Get them involved, have them stand to your side and help you with it. Don't be like, you know, hey, get out of here, I got this handled, because they're a great source of information to try to get this dealt with. So yeah, a little bit goes a long way. How many pounds or gallons are in it? And again, you're going to get that information generally from the driver. If they're bringing it, they can tell you whether it's already been used. Is it a new tank that was heading to the field? What's the situation on that container? That high coefficient of expansion, you don't want to try to trap the liquid. It's going to be pretty impossible because you're not going to find a container readily available to capture it, right? It's going to freeze, it's going to break, it's going to damage it, corrosion. And generally, regardless of how large your container is, they try to fill those only to an 85% limit. And why would that be?
Expansion.
Right, because of its vulnerability for expansion in the weather, right? So even at, if you have a 20,000 gallon tank, it's not going to contain that much. They try to limit all of their fill capacities to 85% to leave room for that expansion. All right. Again, here's a guy did the wrong thing, blew himself up, I'm assuming. Okay, small tank. And again, just for your own knowledge, like I said, these are your different temperature factors that will increase your pounds per square inch within the tank. It doesn't take a high temperature to have a large impact on the pressure within these tanks. Like I said, most of the time, it'll be just a pop-off valve that leaks. If it's not a pop-off valve, what are the two probably most common situations that we're going to encounter issues with these tanks that are leaking? What types of incidents?
Rollover.
Yeah, rollover accident would probably be the most likely one. What's another one?
Just a PI accident.
Well, not even an accident, maybe just operationally. Where is the risk for the leak?
Valve didn't get shut all the way off.
Yeah, either a valve didn't get shut off, if I'm trying to connect it to my implement, if I'm at like I said, the co-op or embargers, if I'm going from a high volume to a nurse tank, anytime there's a connection, that's where you're going to have a higher likelihood. So outside of an accident or rollover, you're looking at just normal operations that something doesn't go right, okay? But yeah, the connections and valves are going to be big. And again, just a picture here, you've got 75% full on one and 5% full on the other, but both of them are extremely dangerous. What are some ways we can look or visually determine whether or not a container has the anhydrous in it?
You'll see a frost line.
Yeah, you might see a frost line, a condensation line. Yeah, the gauge, common sense. Use the gauge, just look at it and see what the gauge is reading. What's the issue with that? You got to get pretty close, okay, to read a gauge. But yeah, not bad. Also, and I'd like to test it if we get out there, but I'm sure a thermal imager might be able to indicate a line as well. You might be able to at least see a line on the tank showing you, how full it is. You'll see a definite temperature change. Maybe not. I don't know. I'd like to test it. And again, just common knowledge here, but all you need to know is that it's corrosive. We don't want it on us and whatnot, but it is. The 30% concentration can have a pH of 13.5, which is again almost a base, right? It is reactive, so keep that in mind. Even using the proper equipment for offloading and so forth, it's going to have a lot of abuse, a lot of corrosion. It's very hard on the metals. So like I said, you might find these fittings that fail. Hose clamps, connectors, hoses themselves will just break down over time. So that's something to be aware of. I mean, here's your, again, UELs, LELs. Why isn't this generally a big concern for us, these upper and lower explosive limits when we're dealing with the anhydrous? Right, it's not contained. Generally, these are going to be incidents that we deal with outside. So if it's outside blowing freely, we don't even have the proper equipment to monitor that level, but we don't have a container to really worry about it. It's going to be free flowing or moving, right? The two different forms for this that we'll find is the vapor and liquid. The vapor is a little more forgiving, right? Because you can see it, it'll move away. You can sort of monitor it. You can somewhat predict what it's going to do. It is irritating at high levels. It can be caustic and it can escape, like we had talked about earlier, laterally and upwind. It really doesn't have any set path. It's going to look for water as well as move with the environment and the topography. On liquid, it's very cold. It can cause frostbite, caustic and alkaline chemical burns. It can actually freeze your clothing, things like that if you get in touch with it, including your fire gear. Okay. So skin and eyes, you got frostbite. For liquid exposure, chemical burns. If we do get it on us or a victim, right? Water, water, water. It says 15 to 20 minutes of constant dilution of water. Remember, 850 to 1. So it's going to take a lot of water to dilute even a small amount of this if it comes in contact with someone. We don't really worry about this because we don't apply any topical ointments anyway, but it's not recommended. Your clothing may freeze to the skin if exposed, and ensure that a patient is properly deconned. You do not want to put somebody in the ambulance that has the ammonia still on their clothing or body, because that compartment at the back of the truck is going to become very nasty real quick. So for the EMS folks, I know, which is all of us, but I mean the really good ones, you medics and such, if I'm responding on an accident involving an anhydrous ammonia leak, what types of injuries or conditions am I getting into my head as far as treatment plans and treatment paths for the patients? What are some things that are going to be sort of in the front of my mind that I might want to be thinking about?
Airway burns.
By airway?
Burns in general are good askenazes.
Yeah, any kind of burns, chemical burns, or the airway. And what's our treatment? If we have somebody who has a pretty heavy inhalation of this, but is still breathing, or at least somewhat, what is the treatment on the street level?
I'm gonna put them down.
Yeah, probably going to intubate. They're going to need to be intubated, probably ventilated, bagged, and then immediately transported. But yeah, like we said, burns. What are some means we have for decon? We talked about this over the last 2 days too, and I think some of us were a little surprised. Used to, we thought, well, we'll just call Greenwood and they'll bring White River and the decon unit and so forth. But where do we get the decon out? Does anybody know?
Decon, cool.
Well, we can. We can utilize our own truck water. We can utilize the aerial device and tarps. We do have the fire scene decon. If the patient is ambulatory and not in any kind of critical condition, we could use our own tent, let them strip down and spray them off with the garden hose and all that stuff. But if not, if we need the decon unit that used to sit at White River, the trailer, the shower trailer, anybody know where that's at? Yeah, we didn't either. So what has happened is the health department in the county has taken that on. It's been parked at the county. Nobody knows really who has it. Nobody knows how you get it. Nobody knows how to run it. Nobody knows what you have to use to get it brought to your scene. So with that, unless somebody tells me anything new today, I believe that that decon trailer is not going to be an asset that you're going to get a hold of in any kind of timely fashion. Now, like I talked about in the beginning, what am I going to do on a hazmat scene anyway? Who am I going to refer to?
Greenwood.
I'm going to call Battalion 9 and say, hey, control, have Battalion 9 call me while I'm en route, and maybe they can get this problem solved really quickly. That's awesome if they can. If they don't, then again, the decon trailer is a little bit hard to get a hold of, we've learned. Okay, so right now it may show up and not be able to run hot water, maybe. So it's not very reliable is what I'm getting at. So be good at figuring out alternative decontamination procedures. They're also not going to let you bring somebody through the ER that hasn't been decon. Going to be one of the first questions on your radio or phone report en route when you tell them that it's been an exposure to anhydrous ammonia. If they have any sense at all, they're going to ask you, has the patient been decon? And if you say no, they're going to stop you in the parking lot. And they're not going to let you bring them in. Okay. What do we got here? Yeah, okay. All right. And again, here's your exposure limits. Really not important to us. Don't be exposed, okay? We should try to strive for 0 levels of contact and exposure to the chemical itself, and we are going to react to the patient conditions based on what's happened to them, right? We can't say, oh, I need to treat your airway when they haven't had an exposure on their airway. You just deal with the patient and the symptoms. No cartridge respirators. This will actually freeze up and plug up cartridge respirators. You need a closed SCBA system, okay? And there's your health issues and it'll cause you bed problems, right? It'll burn you, yada, yada, yada. So indoors, again, flammability and visible cloud. We've determined that we really don't have, where might we find an indoor incident sort of piggybacking on the agricultural area? What might we find? Not a commercial development or whatever. Where might we find a building full of anhydrous ammonia?
A barn.
A barn, right. Somebody's had their nurse tank parked in a barn for whatever reason and popped off in there. So now we have a little bit different issue, right? So we have to ventilate it. What do we have to be cautious of when we ventilate it? Right. Well, number one, where's it going? What do we have in our district that's fairly unique? I mean, you might find an entire neighborhood, right, backed up to a farm field. That's how my house is. I'm right there on the back side of DeHart's field. And if he's working that, I mean, it could easily get into my house or whatever if he has a leak there. Also schools, Union Elementary and the new, what's it called? The Hickory Walnut Grove, whatever it is. right in the middle of farm fields, right? So now they're closed, we don't have to worry about it. But on the flip side, everybody's at home. So if we have a leak, we're gonna have a lot of people at home that we need to be dealing with to determine whether they need to be evacuated, make the contact with them to shut off HVAC systems and all that. So, yeah, but the other thing, ventilate it. So if we're gonna ventilate, we have to be aware of those upper and lower explosive levels too. What we don't wanna do is try to, in an attempt to ventilate the building, put it into a perfect explosive state and some kind of source ignite that. So again, anytime this is within the confines of any structure, I would recommend we turn it into a level A hazmat situation and call technicians in and let them help us deal with it. Might be as easy as opening the barn doors and letting it blow out, but you know, as long as everybody's keeping their cool, I would rather have a little bit of assistance on that to make sure that we don't do something to make the situation worse. All right. Again, you can use negative or positive pressure. And then the level of dress, we don't have a lot of options. We're going to wear structural firefighting gear and SCBA. And if you look at the ERG, it tells you that that does give limited protection. What you're going to find is that we need to limit the time frame. So that's one of those, if we're going to go shut off a valve or anything like that, hook up a connection, then we need to have our guys packed up, another team ready to replace them, another team to rescue them if something happens, and hoses in place. All of that's going to be pretty labor intensive, but we want to make sure that, I mean, we're talking minutes that we should give people to deal with it, because what'll happen is that exposure, it'll start to seep into the gear. You'll start sweating in your gear. And the first thing that anhydrous is going to do is try to seep that moisture. You'll start getting those burns along the out. I mean, you've been in the gas chamber, right? Do they do that in the Navy too, or is that just an Army thing? Okay. So in the gas chamber, you're breathing fine, you don't have any problems, and suddenly your ears are burning. The edge of your face starts to burn, the wrists and your cuffs, everything. You know, so if you're in your fire gear, it's going to make its way up your pant legs, up your coat. Then you'll start to feel that exposure, and it's kind of too late. So if we do send somebody in, geared up, SCBA, to go try to mitigate it, as the incident commander or the officers, keep that in mind, the time, just because you have 20 minutes of air supply, that is far too much time to be messing around in it. So we want to go quickly. You want to try to put water on it to keep it down, get in, shut it off, and get out. If it doesn't go well pretty immediately, then we're going to back out and again, let the hazmat team that hopefully is still on the phone or on the way help us finish this problem.
You do a training on above the line, below the line.
What's that?
You could do a training on above the line, below the line, for rescue assistance gear. You ever heard that, above the line, below the line?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, I'll look it up though. What do you mean?
It's basically when to use your gear, when not to use your gear, and to effective rescue.
Oh, okay.
So it's a hazmat related class. So.
All right. If we're talking outdoors, we're looking at downwind threats, like we said, public exposure, schools, nursing homes, but whatever the case. I think actually isn't it a field? It's a field across from Aspen Trace right now, at least for now. So it could be work. You might have that kind of situation. Weather effects are going to be huge. If it's raining, that's great. Like a day like today, if you have rain, it'll probably keep it down. If it isn't, you know, if it's hot, if it's humid, windy, you're going to have different kinds of problems. And then again, same thing, we consider our level of dress. We don't have options. You're either going to wear full gear or not. Something you can look up for your own later on is this the Borden ice cream plant. They were utilizing anhydrous ammonia under pressurized containers for refrigeration, and something went wrong and it blew up, you know, the whole side of the building here. And this is a prop. We can get these from the state. We can use smoke machines or whatever if we want to. We don't clearly want to release anhydrous ammonia for training purposes, but the reason, who knows why this canopy idea works? What's the theory behind it? I mean, we cover it up with, we cover this up with the canopy, but what's actually happening?
Pushing it back down the ground and just keep it confined to that area.
Yeah, so number one, we're going to keep the cloud somewhat confined, but remember, that's not an airtight container, right? But what it does do is that vapor and cloud will cool the tank itself inside of its own. You sort of make its own little soft refrigerator. So if it's a pop-off valve or a temperature-related issue, then it's going to be pretty effective because it will keep the tank cool. It'll help reduce that interior temperature, and it'll lower the pressure rapidly, and that'll keep it from leaking. So yeah, but the other thing is, you're exactly right. At least I can contain it somewhat, but again, it's going to seep out from underneath. This isn't an airtight container. I've got seams, I've got openings, but it does help you control it in the absence of water while you try to address it. And this is not one where you throw a tarp over it with somebody under the tarp to deal with it and find a valve, right? That's really stupid. So we don't want to do that. Again, just another photo of how we can do that. Again, these guys are all on level A's. If we're making that approach, that's a pretty invasive approach, and we're going to be in level A's. So when we're talking about decisions and considerations for response, find a knowledgeable person. Again, maybe you have somebody who's really good at hazmat, or you're gonna utilize the farmers, the workers, the delivery guys, the people that deal with it. Can the leak be isolated remotely? If it's at a facility or a fixed location, maybe they have a safety shut off, you know, like at a gas station, if a pump's overflowing, there's always the e-stop on the building or in the register or whatever. The best approach may be no approach. I agree partially with that because there is zero situations, in my opinion, where we can take no action. Even if we're not gonna go in and stop the leak, are we still gonna take some type of action on this? Yes, and what would that be? At a minimum. Yeah, we've got to evacuate, isolate, set up the hot, warm, cold zones. So yeah, we may not go shut the tank off, but we're not gonna drive by and go, no problem. We have to do something. So even in this no action approach, there's still things that we need to do. I just wanted to be clear. Now it does say here that the fire department do not be valve turners. Again, we want to do that carefully. Do we want to wait 30 minutes for a team to arrive if we can safely go in and shut off a valve or reconnect something? No. And we talked to Chief Pruitt about this on Tuesday because I want to make sure that what I was telling you does kind of follow what he's thinking as well, and he agreed. I have had leaks before when we were at the old station where the farmers would be like, oh, let's go over and shut it off. And we were like, no way, man, this is dangerous. We got to call help. I would not let a farmer go up without PPE and deal with this because that's dangerous. But we are okay with SCBA, structural firefighting gear, hose in place, go in quickly, shut it down and come back. That's fine. Again, given the considerations of the knowledge and abilities of the people that you have working that day, how long you have to deal with it, and then how bad the leak is and the weather conditions. But it is not out of the question for us to go shut off a leaking anhydrous ammonia tank if we do it correctly. And again, he agreed with that. So I've made sure that we have shared that, you know, across the shifts. The level of dress, same thing. We only have one answer. And then when and where is to use water. And a lot of times that's going to be our primary, is get some water on it to keep that cloud down. Now, if this is sitting out in the middle of a field, what is something that, as we talk about decision making and resources, that we might want to consider bringing along or having started?
Tanker.
A tanker. We might need a lot of water. I think somebody said, what'd you guys say?
Brush truck?
Yeah, the grass rig, right? I may need to get out to a field, and the only way to do that is going to be with the grass rig. I might not be able to reach it and put water on it otherwise. So that's something to keep in mind. If this call comes out in one's area and you guys are on station and available, you might want to consider, if you get at least enough information to know it's a tank leaking in a field, I would start a grass rig. If not ours, start a grass rig from somewhere. That can be a big benefit. So we want to control and contain, and again, tarp as a cover is an option, and we talked about that. I think that's more of a level A operation, but it is something that we can keep in mind. All right, any questions about the chemical properties? Again, probably not telling anybody anything earth-shattering that they weren't aware of, but I do, you know, again, I appreciate it. I've asked several times, hey, what should we train on? Give me some ideas, and Chief Pruitt has been really good about throwing things at me. So, again, apartment fires, and now we've done this. So I am good with that. Find this, I'm sorry. All right, we will quickly go through this because we're going to focus more on the nurse tankers than anything else. But like Steve said, there is, moving forward, the potential for all kinds of chemical transport out here on the interstate when it comes, but I don't know if any of us will even be here when that happens. All right, so for one, don't expect to become an expert in this 1 hour session. I will add to that, don't expect this to be a 1 hour session, so you can relax a little bit. But you want to get to know your transporters, agricultural users, and industrial facilities in your area. As far as users, they are everywhere. We have users all over the district, but for the most part, embargers and the co-op are going to be your big, high risk areas. Transport and storage equipment for anhydrous ammonia is highly regulated. Yes and no. Why do I mean? Why is it not? At what point is it not highly regulated?
When the farmer gets it.
Yeah, once it leaves wherever it's being sent, sold, or filled from. And I don't know, Jeremy, do most of these guys just rent these for the season, or do a lot of guys own their own?
No, nobody owns their own. Co-op and embargo own them all. They don't. I mean, you don't pay them anything for it. They make their money selling you the product. And
okay.
Part of their business is you got to have a means to inject it, so they own the tanks.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah. So with that being said, they are probably in pretty good shape. They've got proper placarding. I'm going to assume that they're in safe condition. Again, I don't deal with them often, but even at that, I mean, if you have not seen an anhydrous ammonia nurse tank, we'll show you one, but what is it? It's a tank setting on a cross frame of angle iron with some pretty narrow wheels. Like, it is not a real complicated device, right?
It's an LP tank, basically. It's no
Yeah,
different than your everyday LP tank sits in somebody's yard.
Right, it is very top heavy, right? It is not, if you ever followed one, what's it look like? Anybody see? Yeah, it is shifting back and forth real bad. There's no balance, no anti-sway on it. So, you know, these are generally should be pretty low speed transport. You might find a couple of them connected. I think in here it'll tell you that you shouldn't have more than 2 connected. Probably won't let you leave co-op with more than 2 of them. But if I'm a farmer and I got myself, you know, or some 14-year-old kid pulling them, Jeremy, how many of you? What's the most you've ever seen connected?
Yeah, 2. I mean, you're pushing your full 2. I mean, you might get by with more than that if they're empty.
Right. So anyway, just keep it in mind.
'Cause there's no brakes on them, so the whatever's pulling the wagon is doing all the stopping power. It's not so much it's not the pulling, it's the stopping power. So
Yeah.
So again, they're not. I mean, again, not very complicated. Not a lot of safeties on it. It's just a trailer, right? Accidental release can and will occur. Be prepared by learning more about anhydrous ammonia. So congratulations, you are doing just that. Keep in mind again from your hazmat days, the MC 330s and 331s are just your large volume cargo containers, and then we are probably going to most likely deal with nurse containers or nurse tankers. These are the bobtail version, just like you guys have ascertained so far. Looks just like your Silgas or whatever LP delivery company. Not much different at all. The only thing different is they do utilize different grades of hoses and connections just because of the corrosive nature of the product. Again, these large transport tanks, the 330s and 331s, you're looking at 8,000 to 12,000 gallons. So again, 850 to 1, you get a 12,000 gallon tanker with a rupture. Going to be pretty massive cloud, but it's probably not going to last very long. So that's the good news. Nurse tanks come in various configurations. Again, they might be being pulled behind the tractor and then connected to an implement, maybe being pulled by a farm truck. I mean, hell, I don't know, maybe pulled by probably not a 4-wheeler, maybe a little bit heavyweight, but you probably would not be surprised to see some of the means that people will use to try to move these around once they get, to a location. I have not seen in use around here the tandem side-by-side dual tanks, but some guys yesterday had. I've just not seen them. But, all right, so like I said, here we got moisture on the ground. What does that tell me? A couple things, but first of all, what does it tell me if there's moisture on the ground under the trailer? Empty or has content. Right, it's got something in it, right? So we're getting condensation. We're also getting condensation because the tank is probably heating up a little bit, all right? Okay, so our safety valves, internal valves, are going to be 2 of them on these regulated tankers, on the large tankers. And they're going to be one on the driver's side front and one on the passenger side rear. And the reason is it gives you hopefully 2 options if you exit the vehicle as a driver to help deal with it. Because I think standard procedure is if they're in an accident of any level, DOT regulations are supposed to get out and shut their emergency valves off so that there isn't a secondary leak occur or anything. So they might be air, cable, or a fusible link. And again, fusible link, if the tractor catches on fire, it might burn that link through. It goes at 250 degrees, and then it will drop. And when these valves fail, they fail in the closed position. So once they're tripped, it's not something you're going to reopen on the scene. It's going to have to go somewhere for that. You might have a pull cable for it. Some of these are going to be, let me find it here. So yeah, hopefully they're ID. You'll have emergency shut off. There's ways you can reach in with a pipe pole and things like that so that you can try to keep some distance on these to shut those off. But again, if the driver is not incapacitated, they're probably going to handle this before we arrive. And if they didn't, then that would be one of the first questions I would ask as the officer arriving is, hey, are your emergency shutoffs engaged? Yeah.
What is that actually shutting off?
It shuts off the flow. I think it simply closes the siphon tube, and I think it shuts it off from the tank to whatever delivery port it has, I think. Does that anybody know? I think the emergency shutoff just shuts it off from wherever it leaves the tank to the delivery system and all the hoses, pipes. You'll have some residual in the system, but it won't let any more out than what maybe is already setting in whatever it takes to activate the gauges and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it should keep it from coming out of the tank from that point. There's some hand pull, actuated levers, yeah, just several different methods. There's air brakes. So if we have some, again, it can be activated with the brakes, or if those hose lines are ruptured or removed, it again fails in the closed position. One thing that you'll notice about all of these gauges and valves is they are under some kind of protection. So now how much, like I said, this is the compartment where you'll find all the controls for the delivery guy. And then the next photo here shows all the gauges, right? For these gauges to read, they have to have product running through them. So those have to be protected as well. You will get a leak if a gauge is removed, it's knocked off. So they're all down in these cylinders, or, sometimes they're in cages. There's some relief valves on the top of the trailer, on the large capacity trailer. And this is one, again, if I arrived at this incident, one of my first questions, if the driver's available, is, hey, if we got everything shut down, is the, emergency valves in place? And then here's just one example of some of the safety cages that would be around that. But how much protection is that against a vehicle impact? Not a lot, probably, depending on what the car is. Okay. Then just some examples of some failures. Again, this one here on the right has a flapper gauge. If there's a leak, it engages and closes at least past a certain point. The hose, you might have a side blowout because of pressurization, damage, wear. They get bent and folded and rolled and put back and taken out of the truck repeatedly. And for whatever reason, they just make the example here, do not use LP gas for anhydrous ammonia delivery. And now, again, stepping back to what we talked about earlier, where was that a greater issue than any other when we had improper delivery methods?
Meth lab.
Meth
Yeah,
buildings.
meth labs, because I can't just go grab anhydrous ammonia connections, tubing, and transfer materials from Lowe's, but I can get LP lines. So they would utilize those same things, but they're not made for that. So, and again, like I said, these guys aren't really scientists, regardless of what they think. Okay, so there's just some photos of nurse tankers. This is not uncommon to see a whole field of these lined up based on the acreage. They'll get them set up and they'll start, they'll run them and they'll switch them out. Some may be full, and even if they have emptied it, right, and used all of it, an empty tank can still sit there, heat up, and then pressurize and give you a pop-off valve. So again, don't panic if we arrive and there's a little bit of an odor, and that recognize that it may be a pop-off valve, not a ruptured tank, because again, I think a ruptured tank, you won't deal with it. What will we deal with on a ruptured tank?
Evacuation.
Yeah, evacuation, injuries, secondary issues. I think unless like they roll it in the front parking lot at once, you're probably not going to deal with a ruptured tank because it's going to expel all of its content so quickly that that won't be an issue when we arrive. But there will be things following the event that we have to handle. Real quick. I mean, again, you should see the slow moving vehicle signs on these. That's a standard. There is, a placard, use the ERG, should know it, get everything you need to know from there. Be really good at Googling things, but make sure, try to get a reliable resource, the DOT, Canadian, or the ERG book and all that stuff. This is just an example of rollover protection here in the top. It's got all of those valves, gauges, and fittings are connected in case these roll over. Like I said, they're top heavy. They aren't very stable. Doesn't take much to roll one. And so, like I mentioned earlier, this is a siphon tube. It's a liquid, right? And it's a liquid that sits at the bottom of the tank. So to get it out, it is siphoned out through this tube. What happens if this trailer is inverted?
It changes that.
Right, it changes what may happen because you can't offload it if it's inverted because now the tube is up out of the liquid side. So it needs to be uprighted. We don't upright tanks. That's something that we're going to let whoever deal with. If we get there, it's laying on its side or inverted and it's not leaking, we're just going to keep the road blocked, call somebody to come and deal with it and let them handle uprighting it. Probably have some kind of agreement between the wrecker companies and the farming or whatever, but we are not going, hey guys, help me shove this over. No. We're not going to do that. There's a potential for further damage. There's a potential for leaks where there aren't any. So that's not something that we're going to do. Just an example of the relief valve. Again, once that pressure gets to a certain point, pushes the spring, opens the valve, bleeds off until the pressure regulates and it settles back down. And these will happen, multiple times on a real hot day, and it's not really a problem. The problem comes from somebody out taking a joyride again through Union Township, driving past the field, and they get a face full of ammonia after a pop off. They panic, they call, we show up, probably nothing to find. And then this is just to show you the potential devastation of these, not that you don't believe me, but so here's some photos from a tank rupture. It crossed the yard, destroyed a tractor, and came to rest 250 feet away from its original position. It did miss other tanks and buildings, hit a tractor, of course, created a huge vapor cloud. And it has the high potential for injuries. Again, anybody near this thing when it goes off is probably going to be in pretty bad shape. Not only from the chemical exposure, there's concussion issues. Again, if we're talking about victims, there's going to be concussion issues. There's going to be blast injuries. There's quite likely a potential for shrapnel, that kind of stuff. So be aware of that if you have a call like that. What are all these options for injuries I might encounter? But so this is setting, so there's a tank setting there, this platform, looks like an offloading platform of some sort next to this other tank. The next photo shows it now setting again that 250 feet away. This is basically looking now from the opposite. This is looking from about the other side of this tank looking over. There's a tractor. It hit this old tractor and snapped it in two on its way through the yard. It's like one of those cars in the movie tipping tractors. So here's the tank, blew right off of the frame. This is the one side of the rupture, okay, which is bad enough. But again, there's the other side. So if you're in the vicinity of that piece of metal that comes off, you're probably dead. And again, are we going to deal with a leak on this? No, it's all gone, right? But what is interesting is, again, if you look at this photo, it shows you this vegetation, the brown vegetation and the green vegetation are both the same. What has happened? It tells you underneath there, but as we talked about the anhydrous, what happened to that vegetation that's brown?
Burned up.
Well, a chemical burn, that anhydrous ran through that, right? It sought that area out, probably because it's a low-lying drainage ditch, right? Probably has water. But when it hits that vegetation, it just zaps all the moisture out, okay? So yeah, it basically gave it an immediate drought condition and pulled every bit of moisture out of that as it passed through. So,
Track.
yeah, you can see where it went. That's clear, okay? All right, so any questions about the transport? All right, I do have, so real quick, I got a disclaimer, all right? This is apparently a setup fake training video, which is fine, but I think it was pretty well done for 20 years ago. And at the end of the day, I think it gives you a pretty good understanding of what could happen. And we'll break it down really, I mean, it's only like a 5-minute video and I won't make it much longer than that, but it is pretty interesting. I watched it when I took hazmat class several years ago, but it's from the Illinois State Police. It has the appearance of an actual incident with dash camera footage, but again, I was told yesterday that it was fake set up and it was a training video. So either way, pretty good in my opinion. And hopefully they fix the sound. Yeah, you guys hear it down there?
No.
You guys hear the video down there?
No, we're not hearing anything.
I hear a bunch of coughing.
All right, so this is awesome. Boyer apparently fixed my sound and took yours away. Yeah, I don't know why. So you can't, hang on.
Is it ran through the stereo there?
Well, yes, they heard it Tuesday and Wednesday. So today's the first day that we can hear it in here and they can't. Because before it was only coming out of the iPad. So, all right. Well, anyways, long story short, this says that this Illinois state trooper was dispatched to a vehicle accident. That the state police officer wasn't given any of the background information that there was anhydrous involved or farming equipment, just that a car accident. In a strange turn of events, the fire department and ambulance was notified that this is an anhydrous leak. So what you'll get is, as he arrives.
Cosmological indicators.
Yeah. So you guys still can't hear the audio from this YouTube video down there?
Correct, we cannot.
All right, well, I'll call them again. Almost had it.
TV turned up.
Yeah, you might, I mean, try a volume switch first. But yesterday and Tuesday, it was fine.
You're not doing very good.
Nope.
All right, so just a couple things real quick. Again, the officer radios that I'm on the scene and I think I have a fire, I see smoke, right? So again, he's not been given the information that there's an anhydrous leak. Secondly, if you look in the ERG, does anybody know what the immediate safe zone is for small to moderate leaks for an anhydrous leak? Anybody know?
I don't know.
Further than what he is.
Right, well, anyway, yeah, it's 100 feet at a minimum and then 500 feet. So again, this guy, and then, you know, I'm all sad now because I thought this was real, but I'm happy because the guy doesn't die. But anyway, this guy pulls right up to the front of this thing, jumps out, thinks it's a fire, gets the tunnel vision because I got a body in the road, right? So, and if I have a chemical leak with a victim laying in the roadway, what is probably one of the first things that I'm going to assume? Yeah, they're down because of a chemical leak, right? So the last thing I'm going to do is walk up and check on them. Sorry. But anyway, we'll move on real quick. So they're telling him the fire department ambulance ETA is 5 to 7 minutes. So again, he wants to help.
Everybody wants to be a hero.
Yeah, and he tells them, tell them to expedite, like maybe they should turn on lights and stuff. I don't know. We'll see.
We got an extra.
Yeah, please hurry up. 10:18, bro.
Extreme signal 10.
That's extreme signal 10, not the regular kind.
He parked as close as those cops did on our house fire last year.
Yeah.
All right, so
Down it goes.
yeah, so at about 17 seconds, he runs through the cloud with his tech bag, kneels down next to the patient, starts to cough. So again, for all of us brilliant EMS minds, if I cough, right, I get an inhalation and I cough. What happens immediately after that exhalation?
You breathe in again.
I inhale again, probably even deeper. So I'm in this cloud of anhydrous ammonia, and it's worse than smoke. It's worse than anything else, really, because the minute I inhale that, it is just bonding to every bit of moisture inside of my lungs, all the way down to that alveoli level. So when I do cough, nothing's coming out. So I'm coughing, nothing's coming out, right? Because it's stuck in there, basically an instant pneumonia, pneumonia, pardon me. But I continue to inhale heavily as I'm coughing, right? So this guy makes it about 20 seconds before he's just, you know. Which is great. I mean, this is like Oscar worthy if it's all fake, like the dude said yesterday. So very well done. So dispatch keeps radioing for him. He doesn't answer. All right. And then again, this says that the rise and fall of the chest is the only thing you hear on his body, not a body camera at the time, just a microphone connected to the dash cam. But as he's breathing, you can hear a little bit of scratchy sound here and there. Keeping in mind, too, that there's potentially another victim because there is a second car. But he didn't even get that part. Let me speed this up a second. Yeah, yesterday I was told it's on the Illinois State Police's website. It says that it's fake. I'm like, okay. So anyway, yeah, these guys arrive. Now they come off, they're stretching a line. So one of two things has happened, right? A, they got the information that anhydrous leak and they somewhat have an idea of how to handle it. Or B, they got the information that was reported to dispatch from the officer that there was a fire. Either way, whether it's tactics and or dumb luck, they're coming off the truck on SCBA, and so they're doing the right thing. I think they're a little close still, but location could have been better chosen. You'll see here, they come up, they'll deploy the hose line to start hitting, and as soon as you do that, if you put a wide fog on this cloud, the respiratory issue and the vapor issue goes away. There is still a chemical release. There's still, you know, anhydrous ammonia in the area, but the risk to you immediately is greatly reduced once we get that water on it, and we dictate where it goes instead of letting it sort of find its way. Okay. So again, these guys, somebody's checking on the vehicle. This guy's screaming, you got an officer down. HD removal would be ideal. So Also, Tuesday, Chief Pruitt sent out several small video clips. If you haven't watched those yet, just take your time and do that on your own. But really good stuff. Some was from, like from a farmer doing a little walk around. I do have calls into Umbargers and the co-op to try to just do a really brief walkthrough of their facilities just to see how it's set up. And for those of us, again, who aren't real well versed in agricultural machinery, get an idea how these tanks are set up, where the valves are, the shutoffs, all that kind of stuff. So any questions? I will call Boyer about this audio issue now. Like I said, one problem leading to another. But any questions about anything that we covered there? All right, perfect. I don't know. I think is Chief Pruitt in there? He was going to chat with you guys about your fire the other night.
He just walked through.
All right, well, I'm going to turn off the recording on this real quick and just leave it open for you guys.
Hey, Jason,
Yes, sir.
can you do me a favor? I emailed you the audio from the fire run.
Oh, yeah.
Can you open that up and just run it for everybody real quick? And it's,
We can't hear anything over here.
Well, I will try. That's what I was telling them. So I had no audio up here. Boyer logged in and fixed it yesterday, but now I have audio and they don't. So
okay.
I don't know why. So I tell you what I'll do. Shit.
Because I can hear you. Is there any way for you to put the audio somewhere where?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I can probably just run it close to this mic, I guess. Well, yeah, you know what? Let me do it that way.
Do it that way and we'll go with that for right now.
Okay. Yeah, let me go kill this recording real quick.
Okay. So we're gonna talk a little bit about fire run. My plan is every time we get a fire run or PI with a